Hello and welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. Israel faces global criticism over its planned Gaza City operation amid warnings of humanitarian crisis and famine. Neighbouring states like Egypt and Jordan and also Lebanon watch tensions closely with risks of a spillover. In Europe, Ukraine pushes for NATO-style guarantees as defence spending rises, questioning the West's reliance on US support. Trump's tariffs strain US-India relations, while India and China engage in dialogue, signalling multipolar strategy. Africa's coups and BRICS expansion spark debate over geopolitical influence as journalists navigate propaganda and eroding public trust. Joining us now is Dan Perry, former cable and regional editor for the Associated Press in Cairo, London and Africa. He's also the former chairman of the Foreign Press Association in Jerusalem. He is the author of 2 books on Israel and a technologist who has advised global clients in healthcare, tech and public affairs. Dan contributes opinion pieces to Newsweek and The Forward and publishes his Substack as Ask Questions Later. Thank you very much, Dan, for joining us. Today, he discusses Israel's planned Gaza City operation and the escalating humanitarian crisis. He examines the risks of the spillover to Egypt, Jordan and Lebanon and pressures on Europe and Ukraine and NATO requests. He also addresses US-India tensions, India-China dialogue and Africa's emerging geopolitical role. Thank you very much for joining us, Dan Perry. Let's get straight into this discussion. My question for you is, let's start. Israel faces global criticism over famine in Gaza and its planned Gaza City operation. From your experience in the region, how might this conflict reshape Israel's international standing in the long term?
Well, it really depends where it goes. There are a number of forks in the road. One is whether it actually goes into Gaza City and completes the plan that's currently on the table. And I don't rule out that this may in fact be a tactic to force Hamas into a different position in negotiations to end the war. And there are signs that that actually may be working. The plan is very controversial, and if they follow it to the full, it would involve Israel retaking all of Gaza City and the rest of the Gaza Strip. Hamas still controls maybe 20% of the Strip, and that's where most of the population is. If Israel does that, well, it'll be saddled with over 2 million people to administer and cater to and provide them with housing and medical attention and food and education and govern them, and it has no desire and little ability to do that well. It's extremely controversial in Israel, opposed by maybe 3/4 of the people, and it opposed by most of the world, and probably also the Trump administration. Donald Trump would like to see an end to the war, and he doesn't mind if Israel does it brutally, but he also wants it to be quick. Famously, he dislikes forever wars, and he ended one. Well, he contributed to the ending of one in Afghanistan because essentially the pullout from Afghanistan was the implementation of a Donald Trump deal. I think if Israel blunders into a long-term occupation of the entire Gaza Strip, that would be very ugly and would further erode and undermine its international standing, its economy, and political stability in the country. I don't think that will happen. I think in the end, whatever they do in coming weeks, even if this incursion begins, more likely is in the end either a deal or some other means to end the war more quickly. Not for the least which reason, Netanyahu at the latest has to face elections in mid to late 2026, and it probably will come sooner. And if he goes to those elections still at war in Gaza, with Israel being trashed in international public opinion and with Israeli soldiers dying at a fairly consistent clip, he will lose those elections quite probably. And he's a very clever politician. I think he's unlikely to proceed in that manner.
Dan, staying with the issue, of course, the war is coming up to 2 years now, and with over 60,000 Palestinians dead, do you see the Gaza war pulling neighboring countries for example, like Egypt and Jordan, etc., closer or further from open confrontation with Israel?
Again, it depends how it ends. There's a catastrophic scenario where this continues and hundreds of thousands of Gazans somehow manage to spill into the Sinai Peninsula, which is a nightmare for Egypt. They quite obsessively oppose giving even temporary refuge to the Gazans. That could be bad. That could undermine and maybe even disrupt the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, which is a cornerstone of the strategic position of both countries. Many bad scenarios are easily imaginable if the war continues for much longer. On the other hand, if the war ends, a lot of things have been clarified here in a manner that, putting aside the unspeakable tragedy that has occurred in Gaza, that in a wider geostrategic sense might be useful and might indeed lead to a closer relationship between Israel and its environs. Consider that until 2 years ago, it was somehow seen as reasonable for Iran, which is a bad faith player and a chaos agent. And I'm talking about the Islamic Republic government, not the people of Iran, to fill the region with proxy militias that undermine the sovereignty of a whole swath of countries. Hezbollah basically controlled Lebanon and would attack Israel and embroil Lebanon in wars at the whim of Iran. Hezbollah also propped up the regime of Bashar Assad in Syria. The Houthis caused the death of almost 500,000 people in Yemen. Shiite militias, basically directed by Iran in many cases, created tremendous political instability and also death and mayhem in Iraq. I could go on. They were trying to destabilize Jordan and on and on. So this was seen as somehow reasonable, and Lebanon had completely lost its sovereignty, and this was in no way helpful to Lebanon. Fast forward to today, Iran has been significantly chastened by the results of its 12-day war with Israel, where it was revealed to have basically no effective air defenses, and certainly its nuclear program was set back to a degree, and also its missile arsenal. And all these militias are on the back foot. Hamas has certainly been massively degraded in Gaza and has been revealed to be an agent of misery and little more for the Palestinians. And Hezbollah is currently has not just been degraded, but is facing a concerted effort by the government of Lebanon to bring about its disarmament, which would have been inconceivable just a while back. So if Israel ends the war in a manner that is acceptable to the region, with a jihadist element in the region having been so significantly chastened and weakened, one can envision if Israel makes certain moves, for example, ends its boycott of the Palestinian Authority, ends its blocking of the PA from returning to power in Gaza, at least as part of a consortium to rule Gaza, and enters some sort of diplomatic process with the Palestinians, one can then imagine normalization with Saudi Arabia. And given what's happening to Israel's north, conceivably, even progress with Lebanon and Syria. You hear just in recent days, Ashara, the new ruler of Syria, talking about the need to come to a security deal with Israel, and even musing about how a peace deal would be helpful to Syria, which I have no doubt is true. Now, none of that was possible before. So, while in no way diminishing how terrible the war has been for everyone, one can see the contours of a landscape that might be better for everyone, for people of moderation and good faith in the Middle East in the years ahead. Much depends on the politics of Israel. A, what the current government does, and B, what the next government will be. I have little optimism for good things if the current right religious coalition stays in power in Israel. But if it is replaced, as polls show that it will be, by next year at the latest, with a moderate coalition, then many great things can actually happen. And the region can take strides towards maybe not a utopian peace, but a far more placid and mutually beneficial set of arrangements.
Dan, thank you very much for that very insightful analysis of the region there. We now move over to Europe for our next discussion, to the defining crisis of that continent, which of course is the Russia-Ukraine war, where Kyiv is pushing for NATO-style guarantees, while the rest of Europe boosts defense spending. Do you believe Europe is ready to shoulder more responsibility for its own security if US commitment wavers, Dan?
I think they would like to. And you very clearly see that Trump has successfully goaded the Europeans into spending more on their own defense, partly by scaring them into the possibility of the U.S. no longer being a dependable ally. So they want to, and they certainly have the money. I mean, it's just a question of reallocation. Europe is extremely wealthy, but they would, I think, find it hard to fully replace the U.S. as the military strategic foundation of the deterrence of Russia in Ukraine. They lack certain intelligence capabilities that come from U.S. Satellites. They lack the air defense cover, Patriot systems, and so forth. They lack long-range missile capability equivalent to what the U.S. could potentially provide. They also don't, to the same degree, constitute a nuclear deterrent, although it's a little bit shocking that we're actually talking about the possibility of nuclear war. I think by and large it would be far better if the U.S. did not walk away from this. But yeah, I think the Europeans are prepared to step up, and I don't think it's meaningless.
Yes, indeed, Dan. Let's now move on and over to Trump's economic policy, where his sweeping tariffs on India have triggered a major standoff beyond economics. What does it say about the future of India-US relations and India's strategic autonomy?
It really is up to India. India can say, well, we're the world's most populous country and we'll do what we want, and we're not part of, anyone else's bloc. And I don't even know if the U.S. and Europe are part of the same bloc anymore. I mean, certainly under Trump, realistically, not so much. Certainly not to the same degree as before. But even if they were, the combined population of North America and Western Europe and Eastern Europe, is about half of India's, or maybe slightly more. So India has a right to go its own way. But if it goes its own way, then there is a price to pay. You're either an ally of the West or you are not. And when the West is desperate to bring Russia to heel and to make it clear that Russia should pay a price for its naked aggression in Ukraine, and India goes ahead and vastly increases its purchase of Russian oil to the point where I believe currently it's importing a third of its oil from Russia, about $50 billion a year. That is a very clear statement from India that we don't care about your priorities to the West, and that we don't care about, deterring Russia in its outrageous aggression against Ukraine. I mean, it really cannot be said enough. Russia is the world's biggest territory, and Putin was apparently perfectly happy to sacrifice millions of lives and unbelievable treasure to get a bit more land. It's manic. And I think most people in the world looking at this objectively would say, yeah, they should be deterred. And this kind of dictator, if you try to appease them, without making a comparison that is, a bit beyond compare, the allusions to the Munich conference in 1939 are not unreasonable. They tried to appease Hitler by giving him Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia, and that did not work out too well. Plenty of countries in the former Soviet Empire are looking very carefully at what is going to happen in eastern Ukraine and in general with Ukraine. And if the world abandons Ukraine, it's not paranoia to imagine that Putin may not be kidding when he expresses very clear nostalgia for the former Russian Empire via communism. He may not be a communist, but he certainly is a Russian imperialist. So why India would want to aid and abet this is an open question, but that's what it's doing. It's almost surprising that Trump is as upset as he is, given that Trump himself has a very odd admiration for Putin, which is extremely problematic. But it's not surprising that the U.S. in general is displaying unhappiness with this. Now, the unhappiness is translated mainly into tariffs imposed and threatened upon India, and that's a whole separate question. Trump seems to not understand what tariffs are meant to be, because tariffs, the only defensible tariffs are if you want to protect a particular industry. It's not meant to be a tool of diplomacy, and they're in effect shadow taxation on your own people, because tariffs are paid by the U.S. consumer, not by the country that's being tariffed. Nonetheless, they can be effective if India wants its exports to the U.S. to be unharmed. And so whether that or not will work, we'll have to see. But it really is India's decision about whether it wants to aid Russia in its war against Ukraine, which it is doing currently, and whether it wants to upset the West to the degree that it is by exploiting the short-term opportunity of getting cheap gas and other trade with Russia at the expense of its relations with the West.
Yes. Thank you, Dan. Now let's move on and over to a region that's not spoken about enough. Dan, you oversaw the coverage of Africa for the Associated Press. With coups in the Sahel and BRICS expanding, is Africa becoming a genuine geopolitical power center, or is it still treated as a pawn in great power rivalry?
Well, Africa is not a factor strategically for other countries. They don't threaten or assist, Asia. And their economic power is not what it should be given their numbers, but they do have economic growth. They have the potential for a lot more economic growth. I believe by 2050, 1 in 4 people in the world will be African. The reason to be optimistic is very clear. They have demographics on their side, very youthful. They have tremendous natural resources, and the baseline is low. So there's growth to be had. On the other hand, Africa remains bedeviled by what has been the case since decolonization: tremendous corruption and bad governance, tribal infighting, all over the place in East Africa, and West Africa, and Central Africa, under education and on. The problems are well known. So the degree to which Africa can be a player that has agency, as opposed to is exploited by outside powers that are powerful, is related to how Africa conducts its own affairs in coming decades. Certainly, there is potential for economic and soft power in Africa by whoever sees an optimistic future and is willing to invest in Africa. And China has done that very well. U.S. and especially Europe, which is a little bit chastened by its colonial past, less so. And for India, there clearly is an opportunity because for many reasons. One is proximity. The other is that India is always looking for new markets and influence, certainly under the Modi government, which is essentially nationalistic. And also there is, India has an interesting past in Africa wherein they have had Indians living in Africa. And basically it was a good experience mutually, but they've not had colonization really in a way that creates lingering animosity. So there is certainly potential for India. There is certainly a scenario for Africa in the future that involves great growth and promise for the people of Africa, but also that can lead to a good business for outsiders. But much depends on whether they can find a way to pacify the continent and improve governance.
Yes, thank you very much, Dan Perry, for speaking to us on Focal Link. Some brilliant analysis there. With that, it is a wrap on this episode. For more international news and updates, stay tuned on NewsX World.